The hermit sat in the shade of a crumbling structure, the wind carrying the faint scent of dust and decay. His eyes, hardened by years of solitude, scanned the barren landscape. His home, a desolate corner of the galaxy, had been untouched by time, a place he thought the alien kings would never find. But the air had changed. His senses tingled with the unease that came before every storm. He knew they were coming. The alien kings, a collection of ruthless conquerors, immortal beings who had crushed countless civilizations, were the stuff of legends. They were feared across the galaxy, their strength unparalleled. Their empire had swept across the stars, leaving only ruins in its wake. Humanity had been one of their first conquests, reduced to nothing more than a distant memory. Or so they thought. For years, the hermit had lived alone, hidden, far from the remnants of humanity. His name, a secret buried deep within the galaxy's forgotten history, meant nothing to him. It was only a part of the past he had tried to leave behind. But the whispers had reached the kings, and now they were hunting him. He had heard the stories, the prophecy. The ancient texts spoke of the last human, a singular figure whose very existence would herald the downfall of the alien kings. To the kings, it was just an old myth, a remnant of a species they had erased. Yet the hermit had lived in peace, avoiding the inevitable. Until now. A fleet of alien ships cut through the atmosphere, their sleek, intimidating forms casting long shadows across the planet's surface. The kings had arrived. They descended from their ships, their heavy boots making the ground tremble. There was no fear in their movements, only certainty. This human was nothing more than a relic, a pathetic reminder of a species they had long since eradicated. He would fall just like the others. The hermit watched them from his hiding place. He had known this day would come, but he had never expected it to arrive so soon. His fingers tightened around the worn handle of his blade, a weapon forged in the days before the kings had wiped out his people. He was prepared, but the question lingered in his mind, should he fight? For years, he had lived alone, hiding from the past. He had hoped that the galaxy would forget about the humans. But now, the alien kings stood before him. And they would not leave until they had destroyed him. He knew he could not outrun them forever. The king at the front, a towering figure with a voice that seemed to shake the very air, spoke. "You are the last of your kind, human. We've hunted you down, and now you will be erased." His voice was cold, but there was a hint of something else, a strange apprehension. The hermit did not respond. He had heard these words before. They meant nothing now. Instead, he focused on the ground beneath him, the vibration of the king's steps growing louder. This was it. His time had come. The kings were certain that he had no power left. They believed that the human race had died with his ancestors, that he was nothing more than an insignificant survivor. But they were wrong. As the king spoke again, his name slipped from his lips, almost as a formality, a last-ditch effort to assert control over the situation. But as soon as his name was spoken, the ground beneath them shook. A strange, powerful force rippled through the air, resonating with an energy that none of the kings had anticipated. For the first time, they hesitated. The hermit felt it too. The moment his name was uttered, something stirred deep within him. A power he had never understood. His father's name, his grandfather's name, it was all part of something greater. Something ancient. His pulse quickened as the realization hit him like a wave. He was the last human. The prophecy was real. The alien kings stared at him now with wide eyes. The realization that this was no ordinary human began to sink in. The hermit was not just a survivor. He was the key to their downfall. His name was a signal, an ancient call that had activated a force they could not control. Their empire, built on the blood of countless civilizations, was now at risk. For a moment, the hermit stood frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. Could it be true? Was he really the one to end their reign? He had spent years in solitude, avoiding his past, hiding from the history of his people. But now, his name had sealed his fate. The kings were no longer the hunters. He was the hunted. The air crackled with energy. The hermit's hand instinctively moved to the small pendant around his neck, a relic of his lost civilization. He didn't know what it was capable of, but he could feel it, an ancient power that had once been harnessed to fight the kings. His ancestors had created it. It was part of the prophecy, a weapon that could bring the kings to their knees. The hermit's eyes met the alien kings, the weight of their stare telling him everything he needed to know. They were afraid. They were no longer in control. And for the first time in years, the hermit felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The galaxy had not forgotten him. He had not been abandoned. But the path ahead was not clear. There was a war to be fought, and it would not be easy. The kings would not surrender without a fight. He would need to face them, to embrace his destiny. He could no longer run. The hermit took a deep breath. His name, his true identity, had been revealed. The prophecy was not just a story, it was a warning. The kings would come for him, but this time, they would not be the ones in control. He would be the one to lead the resistance, to unite the scattered remnants of humanity, and to end their reign. And so, the hermit stepped forward, no longer the solitary survivor hiding from the past. He was the last human, and he would fight for a future where his people could rise again. The kings had hunted him, but now the tables had turned. The fight had only just begun. The alien kings stood tall, their gleaming armor reflecting the harsh light of the dying sun as they made their way through the barren landscape of the hermit's planet. Their overwhelming presence was undeniable, each of them larger, stronger, and far more powerful than any human could ever hope to be. They had come to eradicate the last human. It was a simple task in their eyes, one that had been long overdue. They thought of the human as nothing more than a relic, a weak survivor living in the shadows of the past. The hermit had lived alone for years, keeping to the wilds of the planet, far from civilization, in the hopes that the galaxy would forget about the human race. Humanity had been eradicated long ago, wiped out by the alien king's empire in their quest for galactic domination. But this hermit had survived, hiding in isolation, and though he knew his time was running out, he never expected this day to come. But it had. The kings had arrived. Their ships had landed with precision, as if they had done it 1,000 times before. The hermit had long since given up on the idea of escape. There was no way to outrun them. His legs were tired, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was about to happen. They were too powerful. He had never truly believed in the prophecy that spoke of the last human, the one who would bring about the fall of the kings. It was a story, a myth, something to comfort those who were desperate for hope. But now, with the king standing before him, he couldn't help but feel the weight of destiny pressing on his chest. His mind raced as he considered the possibility of fighting back. He wasn't a warrior. He had never been trained for battle. But he had survived because he was resourceful. He had survived because he had learned how to disappear into the wilds, how to make the planet his home. But survival wasn't enough anymore. The kings had come for him, and they would not leave until he was dead. The kings advanced with deliberate steps, their voices booming across the empty plains. The leader, the one who towered above the others, spoke first, his voice thick with authority. "We have found you at last, human," he declared. "You will be erased, just like the rest of your kind. You are the last of a dead species." The hermit said nothing. He couldn't. The words felt meaningless now, hollow. He had heard them too many times before. The kings thought they had already won, but they were wrong. They hadn't realized that there was more to this human than they knew. He was not just a survivor. He was the last piece of a puzzle they had never been able to solve. As the kings moved closer, one of them spoke his name. It wasn't a command or a threat. It was a simple utterance, as if the king were testing the air, trying to provoke a reaction. But the moment the name left the king's lips, everything changed. A surge of energy rippled through the air, a pulse of power that seemed to emanate from the very core of the planet. The hermit felt it before he understood what was happening. His breath caught in his throat, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. His name had been spoken, and with it, something ancient had awoken. The alien kings stopped in their tracks. They looked at each other, confusion spreading across their faces. This was not what they had expected. They had thought that the name would be just another trivial detail. But instead, it had triggered something far more dangerous. Something they could not control. The hermit felt it too. His pulse quickened as he recognized the power within him, the power that had lain dormant for so long. He didn't know how or why it had awakened now, but he could feel it. His name was a key. It was the key to a power he had never understood, a power that had been hidden within the human race for centuries. And now, the kings were about to learn just how dangerous that power could be. The kings, for the first time, seemed uncertain. Their immense strength, their immortality, had always made them invincible in their eyes. But now, before this unassuming human, they felt something they had never felt before: fear. They had underestimated him, believing he was just a weak survivor. But he was not. He was the embodiment of the prophecy they had long ignored. And now, they realized their mistake. The hermit's hand moved instinctively to a pendant around his neck, a small, weathered relic from a past he had never truly known. It had always been there, but he had never understood its significance. Until now. As his fingers brushed over it, the energy inside him flared, growing stronger, more focused. He had always wondered why he had kept it, why he had never parted with it. Now he understood. It was part of the prophecy. It was a key to unlocking the power within him, a power that could bring down the alien empire. The leader of the kings stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the hermit with a new sense of wariness. "What is this?" he demanded. "What have you done?" The hermit did not respond. He didn't need to. The kings had already answered their own question. The power was within him. It always had been. His name was not just a name. It was a symbol, a catalyst for something far greater. Something that could topple the kings and their empire. As the hermit stood there, the weight of his past and the power of his ancestors flooding through him, he realized that this was no longer about survival. It was about something much larger. The kings had come to destroy him, to wipe out the last vestiges of humanity. But they had underestimated the strength that came with being the last. They had forgotten what it meant to be human. The hermit was not afraid. He had never been afraid of the kings. Not really. He had been hiding, yes, but that was because he had not understood his purpose. Now, standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, he understood. His purpose was clear. He was the one who would bring their empire to its knees. The kings had thought they were invincible, but they had forgotten the strength that lay in the name of a single human. And now, they would learn the true power of that name. The hermit was no longer just the last survivor. He was the key to their destruction. And the galaxy would soon see the fall of the alien kings. The hermit stood in the heart of the desert, the weight of the alien king's presence pressing down on him. Their immense power radiated from them, yet something had shifted. It wasn't just their arrogance anymore. There was doubt in their eyes, a fear that hadn't been there before. They had spoken his name, and with it, a force had been unleashed, a force that they could not understand. The leader of the alien kings, once confident and domineering, took a cautious step forward. His cold eyes never left the hermit. "What is this power you have?" he demanded. "What have you awakened?" The hermit didn't answer. There was no need. The answer was clear. His name, spoken out loud, had triggered something deep within him, something that had been dormant for centuries. It wasn't just his survival that mattered anymore. The hermit was the key to the end of the alien king's rule. The very moment his name was uttered, the prophecy that had long been dismissed by the kings had become undeniable. He wasn't just a man, he was the last hope of an entire galaxy, a force meant to overthrow them. The kings, who had thought of themselves as untouchable, now found themselves facing a power they had never anticipated. They had thought they were invincible, that no one could challenge their rule. But the hermit was not just an old relic of a dead species. He was something far more dangerous. He was a living symbol of the galaxy's resistance. His name had unlocked that power, and now, nothing would stop him. The hermit closed his eyes, trying to understand what was happening inside him. The power was overwhelming, like a torrent rushing through his veins. It was ancient and raw, far beyond anything he had ever experienced. It was the power of humanity, the strength of a species that had once dominated the stars. He hadn't known it was within him, but now he felt it coursing through him. There were no words for the power he could feel inside him. It was more than just strength. It was the culmination of all the suffering, the loss, and the perseverance of his people. It was a power forged through centuries of struggle. The hermit realized he wasn't just the last human, he was the last vestige of a dying civilization, one whose memory was about to rise again. The kings stood silently now, watching him, their usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. They knew they had underestimated him. They had thought they could hunt him down easily, erase him like they had erased so many others before. But the hermit wasn't like the others. He was not just a survivor, he was a force that could bring their entire empire crashing down. The leader of the kings stepped forward, his voice hesitant, but still commanding. "What is this?" he asked again, the desperation in his tone now clear. "What are you?" The hermit felt the weight of his ancestors' gaze upon him. He had spent years hiding from the past, avoiding his true identity. But now, there was no turning back. He was the last human, the one the prophecy spoke of. His name had been the trigger. The time had come for him to embrace his destiny, no matter how reluctant he had been to accept it. A single thought filled his mind. If he didn't act now, the alien kings would continue their reign of terror. The galaxy would remain enslaved under their rule, with no hope for the future. His name was not just a key, it was the spark that could ignite a rebellion. He had the power to unite those who had been crushed by the kings and lead them into battle. But could he do it? Could he really fight back against an empire that had been unchallenged for so long? The hermit hesitated. He had never been a leader. He had never wanted to be. All he had wanted was to live in peace, away from the galaxy's wars and the kings who had destroyed his people. But now, that peace was impossible. The kings had come for him, and they would stop at nothing to erase the last trace of humanity. The hermit clenched his fists, feeling the surge of energy course through him. He had a choice. He could run, continue hiding, and let the kings do as they pleased. Or he could fight. He could unite the resistance and take the first steps toward bringing down their empire. It wasn't a question of survival anymore. It was a question of destiny. His destiny. He looked up at the alien kings, their eyes filled with fear, and he made his decision. He was no longer hiding. He was the last human, and his name carried the weight of an entire species. The kings had thought they had eradicated humanity. But they had made a mistake. They had forgotten one thing: humans had always found a way to rise again, no matter the odds. The hermit's voice rang out, cutting through the tension. "I am the last human," he said, his words carrying the force of 1,000 generations. "And your reign ends now." At that moment, everything changed. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy, a power that the alien kings had never encountered. They tried to move, to fight back, but it was too late. The hermit had tapped into something far greater than they had ever imagined. His name was the key to their undoing, and now the galaxy would rise up against them. The kings attempted to fight, but their attempts were futile. The hermit was no longer the scared, isolated survivor he had once been. He was a leader, a symbol of resistance. His name had become a rallying cry, a call to arms for those who had suffered under the king's rule. The galaxy was awakening, and the alien kings were powerless to stop it. The hermit, filled with the energy of generations past, stood tall as the alien kings fell before him. He had embraced his destiny, and with it, the power to bring their empire to its knees. The prophecy was no longer a myth. It was a reality. As the kings were defeated, the hermit knew this was only the beginning. There was still much to be done, many battles to be fought. But the first step had been taken. The rebellion had begun. And no power in the galaxy could stop it now. The hermit stood amidst the fallen kings, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily upon him. The empire that had once seemed so indestructible was now in disarray. The air was thick with the echoes of the battle, but even as the last of the alien kings fell, he felt no relief, only the crushing realization of what came next. He had won. The prophecy had come true. But as he looked around at the ruins of the king's forces, he felt no triumph. The galaxy was far from free. The fight was not over, it had only just begun. The kings had ruled for centuries, and their fall would not undo the damage they had inflicted. There were countless worlds still under their oppressive control, countless people who had yet to taste freedom. For a brief moment, the hermit questioned whether he had made the right choice. Should he have remained in hiding, continuing his life of solitude, away from the madness of war? But that thought quickly passed. He knew there was no turning back. His name had awakened a power, one that he could not ignore. He had to see this through, not just for himself, but for the galaxy. The resistance had been ignited, but it would need someone to lead it, someone to unite the fractured worlds. And that someone was him. He turned, feeling the weight of his ancestors on his shoulders. Their strength had always been within him, even if he had never realized it before. Now, it was up to him to guide humanity and the oppressed species of the galaxy toward a new future, a future free from the reign of the alien kings. His people had fallen long ago, but their legacy lived on in him. He was the symbol of that legacy now. And that symbol had power. The hermit could hear the whispers of resistance fighters rallying around him, coming from the remnants of the rebellion that had gathered in the shadows of the king's empire. They had been waiting for a leader, someone to ignite the spark of rebellion. Now that spark had grown into a fire. The galaxy was no longer a place of hopelessness. The galaxy now had a chance. But leadership was not something the hermit had ever desired. He had never wanted to be anyone's hero. He had only wanted peace. Yet peace was a luxury the galaxy could no longer afford. He had seen the horrors that the kings had wrought, the countless lives they had destroyed. The hermit knew that the king's defeat was just the beginning, that many battles lay ahead. But he also knew that as the last human, his name would be the one to lead them. His identity was no longer just his own. It belonged to all those who had been crushed under the king's rule. It belonged to the future. The resistance was scattered, fractured by years of oppression and fear. But the hermit had something they didn't: hope. And that hope was enough to unite them. The kings were gone, but their empire was vast. It would take time to dismantle it, to liberate the worlds that still groaned under its weight. But the hermit knew that time was now on their side. He gathered the leaders of the rebellion, those who had survived the initial onslaught, those who had fought for freedom even when it seemed impossible. Together they would form a plan, a new strategy for taking down the remnants of the alien king's empire. It wouldn't be easy. The king's forces were scattered but still formidable. But now they were fighting for survival, and the hermit knew how to fight for something more. He wasn't just fighting for revenge. He was fighting for a future. The decision he faced now was one of immense consequence. The galaxy needed leadership. The galaxy needed someone to show them the way forward, to unite the factions and forge a new alliance against the remnants of the alien empire. But could he do it? Could he be the leader they needed? The hermit stood still for a long moment, pondering that question. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to answer the call. His name, once a symbol of fear in the past, had become a beacon for the future. It was time to rise, not as a hermit, but as the leader of the rebellion, the symbol of human strength, and the hope of a galaxy on the brink of change. The final decision had been made. He would lead. And in doing so, he would reshape the galaxy. The alien kings had fallen, but the work was far from done. The galaxy needed a new order, one that embraced freedom, unity, and strength. The hermit had the power to bring that vision to life. And he would do whatever it took to see it through. As he moved toward the gathering of resistance leaders, the future of the galaxy no longer seemed as uncertain. The path ahead was clear. The rebellion had a leader. The galaxy had a chance.